The last thing Elena Martinez remembered was the blinding flash of headlights cutting through the rain-soaked darkness on Interstate 9. She had been driving home from the most successful client presentation of her career, her mind still buzzing with excitement about the multi-million-dollar contract she'd just secured for her marketing firm. The champagne celebration would have to wait until she got home to Marcus, her husband of 8 years, who had promised to cook her favorite pasta dish to celebrate. Instead, Elena woke up 3 weeks later to the steady beep of machines and the antiseptic smell of the ICU. Her body was a roadmap of pain, broken ribs, shattered left leg, internal bleeding that had required emergency surgery. The doctors explained she'd been in a medically induced coma while her body fought to heal from injuries that should have killed her. They called her recovery miraculous, but Elena felt anything but blessed as she struggled to remember even the most basic functions her body had once performed effortlessly. "Where's Marcus?" were among her first coherent words, her voice raspy from weeks of intubation. The nurses exchanged glances that should have warned her, but Elena was too focused on the absence of her husband's familiar presence. It was Dr. Patricia Hensley, her attending physician, who finally sat beside Elena's bed with an expression Elena would later recognize as barely contained rage. "Mrs. Martinez, there are some legal documents that were delivered while you were unconscious. I'm afraid your husband, he filed for divorce." The words hit harder than the truck that had nearly ended her life. Elena stared at the manila envelope Dr. Hensley placed gently on her bedside table, her name typed in cold official font. Marcus had cited irreconcilable differences and most cruelly claimed she was no longer the woman he married. A reference, Elena would later realize, to the visible scars that now marked her face and body. But the betrayal ran deeper than divorce papers. While Elena lay unconscious and fighting for her life, Marcus had systematically dismantled their shared existence. He'd emptied their joint accounts, liquidated her investment portfolio using power of attorney documents she'd never signed, and sold their home, the Victorian they'd lovingly restored together, to the first buyer who met his asking price. The final twist came 2 weeks after Elena had awakened, delivered by a well-meaning candy striper who didn't realize the magnitude of her casual comment. "Oh, you probably heard about the beautiful wedding at the Botanical Gardens last weekend. Your friend Sarah looked absolutely stunning in her dress. Such a whirlwind romance with your ex-husband." Elena's blood turned to ice as the pieces fell into place. Sarah Chen, her best friend since their freshman year at Northwestern, her maid of honor, the woman who had held Elena's hand through her father's death and celebrated every promotion and milestone. Sarah, who had been visiting their home regularly in the months before the accident, ostensibly to help Marcus cope with Elena's demanding work schedule. As Elena learned to walk again, gripping parallel bars with white knuckles and shaking legs, she discovered that Marcus and Sarah's wedding had been planned with the efficiency of a hostile corporate takeover. They'd married at the very venue where Elena and Marcus had gotten engaged, in front of friends who had once been hers, eating cake from the same bakery that had made Elena's wedding cake 8 years prior. The message was clear: Elena Martinez had been erased from her own life while unconscious, replaced by her best friend in a seamless transition that left no room for her return. They had taken everything: her husband, her home, her money, her friends, even her treasured memories, and transformed her from a successful executive into a broken woman learning to walk again in a hospital gown. But they had made one critical mistake. They had left Elena alive and underestimated what a woman with nothing left to lose could accomplish. The full scope of Marcus and Sarah's betrayal revealed itself in cruel fragments over the following weeks, each new detail cutting deeper than Elena's physical wound. It began with Ashley, a young nurse who couldn't contain her excitement about the romantic story she'd witnessed unfold in the hospital corridors. "Your friend Sarah was here almost every day while you were in the coma," Ashley gushed while checking Elena's. "She and your husband were so devoted, holding hands in the waiting room, comforting each other. It was like watching a movie, two people finding love through shared grief. So beautiful how tragedy can bring people together." Elena's grip on the bed rail tightened until her knuckles went white. Shared grief. The phrase echoed in her mind as she began to piece together a timeline that made her stomach turn. Sarah's daily visits hadn't been about friendship or concern. They'd been reconnaissance missions, opportunities to play the grieving confidant while seducing Elena's husband. The social media evidence came next, discovered during Elena's first attempt at using her phone with hands that still shook from nerve damage. Instagram photos told the story her so-called loved ones had tried to hide. There was Sarah at Elena's favorite coffee shop, wearing Elena's favorite necklace, the vintage pearl one Marcus had given her for their 5th anniversary. Photos dated 3 months before Elena's accident showed Sarah and Marcus at couples dinners. Elena supposedly couldn't attend due to work commitment, but the most damning evidence arrived in Elena's hospital room in the form of a cheerful congratulations card from their mutual friend Jennifer, who had apparently missed the memo about keeping the secret. "So happy for Sarah and Marcus," the card read in Jennifer's looping handwriting. "8 months of secret romance leading to such a beautiful wedding, though I still can't believe they managed to keep it quiet for so long. Love always finds a way." 8 months. Elena stared at the card until the words blurred. 8 months meant the affair had begun long before her accident, during those late nights when Marcus claimed to be working overtime and Sarah insisted on girls' nights that Elena was always too busy to attend. They hadn't fallen in love through shared trauma, they'd been planning Elena's replacement long before fate handed them the perfect opportunity. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source: Miguel Santos, a private investigator and former client who'd heard about Elena's situation through industry connections. He visited her during physical therapy, his weathered face grim as he handed her a manila folder. "I did some digging on my own time," he said quietly. "Thought you should know what you're really dealing with." The folder contained financial records that revealed the true scope of Marcus's theft. He hadn't just emptied their accounts, he'd used Elena's business connections and forged her signature on loan documents to secure a promotion at his consulting firm. The Victorian house they'd lovingly restored had been sold to a developer for significantly below market value in a cash deal that reeked of deliberate devaluation. Most devastating of all, the insurance settlement from Elena's accident, money meant to cover her extensive medical bills and rehabilitation, had already been invested into Marcus's new business venture. "Sarah's family catering company is struggling," Miguel explained as Elena absorbed the documents. "Your settlement money is keeping them afloat. They're not just stealing your past, Elena, they're literally profiting from your pain." As Elena processed this information during her grueling physical therapy sessions, she felt something fundamental shift inside her. The woman who had once believed in the goodness of people, who had trusted without question and loved without reservation, was dying as surely as if the accident had been fatal. In her place, something harder and more calculating was taking shape. James Webb, her physical therapist, noticed the change first. "You're pushing yourself differently now," he observed as Elena completed a set of exercises that should have been impossible given her injuries. "There's a focus in you that wasn't there before." Elena met his eyes in the mirror, seeing a stranger looking back, scarred but unbroken, betrayed but not defeated. "I'm done being the victim in my own story," she said, her voice carrying a steel that hadn't been there before the accident. The realization was complete. Marcus and Sarah hadn't just betrayed her trust, they'd stolen her entire life while she lay unconscious and helpless. But their greatest mistake was assuming that breaking Elena's body would break her spirit. Instead, it had forged something far more dangerous: a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to gain from their downfall. Elena's transformation from victim to strategist began in the sterile confines of the hospital's business center, where she spent hours between physical therapy sessions rebuilding her understanding of the world Marcus and Sarah had tried to erase her from. Her marketing background had taught her that successful campaigns required 3 elements: knowing your target, understanding their vulnerabilities, and timing the attack for maximum impact. Miguel Santos became her primary intelligence asset, accepting her offer to investigate in exchange for future business referrals. His first report painted a picture of 2 people drunk on their own success and careless with their security. Marcus had been bragging about his promotion at industry events, claiming credit for client relationships Elena had spent years cultivating. Sarah had been posting lavishly about their new lifestyle on social media, apparently forgetting that digital footprints were permanent evidence. "They're living like they've already won," Miguel observed during one of their clandestine meetings in the hospital cafeteria. "Marcus is leveraging your old client relationships to expand his consulting practice. He's telling everyone you had a breakdown and recommended him as your replacement. Some of your former clients are starting to ask questions, though. They remember you as sharp and reliable, not someone who'd crack under pressure." Elena filed this information away, already seeing the weak points in Marcus's fabricated narrative. Her reputation in the marketing world had been built on 15 years of consistent excellence. People who knew her work would find Marcus's story questionable, especially once they learned the timeline of her accident and his sudden business expansion. The investigation into Sarah's situation proved even more illuminating. Chen Family Catering had been a successful mid-tier operation for 20 years, but Sarah's mother had been battling cancer and the medical bills had strained their finances. Sarah had convinced her parents to let her take over operations, then immediately began cutting costs in ways that compromised quality. Miguel's contacts in the health department revealed that Sarah's company was already on thin ice. Several minor violations, complaints about food quality, and a pattern of last-minute cancellations that suggested deeper problems. She's desperate. Elena realized as she reviewed Miguel's report, the catering business is hemorrhaging money and she's using my insurance settlement to prop it up. If that income stream disappears, Dr. Webb had become an unexpected confidant during Elena's planning phase. His evening visits had evolved from professional check-ins to strategy sessions, his background in sports medicine giving him insights into competitive psychology that proved surprisingly relevant to Elena's situation. "You're thinking like an athlete preparing for competition," he observed one evening as Elena outlined her research on Marcus's new clients. "But remember, the best victories aren't just about defeating your opponent, they're about doing it in a way that shows everyone what really happened." This observation crystallized Elena's approach. She didn't just want to destroy Marcus and Sarah financially, she wanted to expose the truth of their betrayal in a way that would make their entire social circle understand what they'd done to her while she was fighting for her life. Elena's plan began to take shape across 3 phases, each designed to systematically dismantle the life Marcus and Sarah had built on the foundation of her suffering. Phase 1 would target Marcus's professional reputation. Elena still had access to her old email accounts and client databases. Marcus had been too arrogant to imagine she'd ever be in a position to use them again. She would reach out to her former clients, not to badmouth Marcus directly, but to clarify the circumstances of her departure and offer her consulting services at competitive rates. The goal wasn't just to steal back her clients, but to force Marcus to explain why his mentally unstable predecessor was suddenly competing with him in the marketplace. Phase 2 would focus on Sarah's business vulnerability. Miguel's investigation had revealed that Chen Family Catering was using Elena's insurance money to cover operating expenses, including some questionable practices around food safety and supplier payment. Elena planned to tip off the health department about several violations Miguel had documented, while simultaneously launching a whisper campaign among Sarah's target clientele about the company's declining standard. Phase 3 would be the revelation, a coordinated exposure of the timeline and extent of their betrayal, timed to cause maximum social and professional damage. Elena had been documenting everything: the forged signatures, the financial theft, the insurance fraud, the affair timeline. She would present this evidence at the annual charity gala she'd helped organize for the past 5 years, an event where their entire social circle would be present, including many of Elena's former clients and Marcus's current business contact. "It's elegant," Miguel admitted after Elena walked him through the complete strategy. "You're not just destroying them, you're using their own arrogance and carelessness against them. They got sloppy because they thought you'd never be in a position to fight back." Elena felt a cold satisfaction as she reviewed her plan. Marcus and Sarah had spent months systematically erasing her from existence, but they'd underestimated the very qualities that had made her successful in the first place. Her attention to detail, her understanding of human psychology, and her ability to execute complex strategies under pressure. The woman who had once believed in fairness and second chances was gone, replaced by someone who understood that some betrayals deserved nothing less than complete annihilation. Marcus and Sarah had taught her that mercy was a luxury she could no longer afford. As Elena prepared for discharge from the hospital, she felt a grim anticipation building. Her body had healed enough to function, her mind had sharpened into a weapon, and her enemies had given her all the ammunition she needed. The only question now was whether Marcus and Sarah would recognize the danger before it was too late to save themselves. They had created their own perfect storm, and Elena Martinez was about to become the hurricane that would destroy everything they'd built on the ruins of her former life. Elena's campaign began 6 weeks after her discharge from the hospital, operating from a modest apartment she'd rented, using the small emergency fund Marcus had overlooked. Her first strike was surgical in its precision, a series of carefully crafted emails to her former clients, sent from a new consulting firm she'd established called Phoenix Strategic Solutions. I wanted to personally reach out to clarify some misunderstandings about my departure from Meridian Marketing. Elena wrote to David Chen, CEO of Technova Solutions, and her most lucrative former client. Contrary to what you may have heard, I didn't leave due to any personal issue. I was actually in a medically induced coma following a severe accident during which time my business relationships were transferred without my knowledge or consent. The response was immediate and explosive. David Chen called within hours, his voice tight with anger. Elena, what the hell happened? Marcus told us you'd had some kind of breakdown and specifically recommended him as your replacement. He's been billing us at your old rates while delivering maybe 60% of your quality. Within 2 weeks, Elena had reclaimed 4 of her 6 major clients, each one furious at being deceived about the circumstances of the transition. Marcus's carefully constructed narrative began crumbling as Elena's miraculous recovery from her supposed breakdown became the talk of the industry. His attempts to explain the discrepancies only made him look more suspicious. He's scrambling, Miguel reported during one of their weekly meetings at a coffee shop across town from Elena's old neighborhood. I've got a source at his office who says he's been working 18-hour days trying to manage the client exodus. His business partner is asking questions about the contracts he signed using your credentials. Phase 2 launched simultaneously, targeting Sarah's increasingly desperate attempts to keep Chen Family Catering afloat. Elena's anonymous tip to the health department about expired ingredients triggered an inspection that revealed multiple violations. The subsequent temporary closure cost Sarah 3 major catering contracts, including a high-profile wedding that had been scheduled for the following weekend. But Elena's masterstroke was more subtle. She began attending the same social events as Sarah and Marcus, always looking impeccable despite her visible scars, always gracious when people expressed surprise at her recovery. Her presence alone was enough to make people ask questions about the timeline of recent events. I saw Elena Martinez at the Riverside Country Club yesterday, their mutual friend Jennifer confided to Sarah over lunch, unaware that Elena had strategically positioned herself within earshot. She looked amazing, considering everything she's been through. But I'm confused, didn't you say she was in some kind of mental health facility, because she seemed perfectly fine to me? The whisper campaign Elena had initiated was working. People who knew her professionally couldn't reconcile Marcus's story of a woman who'd suffered a breakdown with the poised, articulate person they encountered at various events. The timeline inconsistencies became impossible to ignore when Elena began casually mentioning that she'd been in a coma during the exact period when Marcus claimed she'd been struggling with personal issues. By month 3, the pressure was showing. Marcus had lost 2 more clients and was facing questions from his business partner about the legitimacy of several contracts. Sarah's catering business was hemorrhaging money, and her parents were demanding answers about where their daughter had found the capital for her recent expansion. The escalation reached a critical point when Marcus and Sarah realized Elena was the common thread in their mounting problems. Their first attempted counterattack was clumsy and desperate. A social media post from Sarah suggesting that Elena's accident had caused personality changes that made her vindictive and unstable. Elena's response was swift and devastating. She posted a hospital timeline showing the exact dates of her coma, her surgeries, and her recovery, alongside screenshots of Marcus's divorce filing and Sarah's wedding announcement. The mathematical impossibility of being both unconscious and vindictive became obvious to anyone who looked at the evidence. "This is harassment," Marcus declared during a heated phone call to Elena, his voice cracking with stress. "You're deliberately sabotaging us out of space." "I'm simply telling the truth," Elena replied calmly. "If the truth is damaging to you, perhaps you should consider why that is." Their second attempt at retaliation was more serious. Marcus filed a complaint with the state licensing board, claiming Elena was practicing marketing consultation without proper credentials due to her cognitive impairment from the accident. He submitted forged medical records suggesting she'd been declared mentally incompetent, a desperate move that would prove to be his ultimate undoing. Elena's response was to invite the licensing board to review her complete medical records, along with her recent work product and client testimonials. The investigation revealed not only that Marcus's claims were false, but that the medical records he'd submitted contained forged signatures and fabricated diagnoses. The board forwarded their findings to the district attorney's office. "They're panicking. Webb observed, during one of their dinners, a relationship that had evolved from professional to personal as Elena's campaign intensified. Desperate people make stupid mistakes. The stupid mistake came in the form of Sarah's attempt to liquidate Elena's insurance settlement money by transferring it to an offshore account. Miguel's financial contacts flagged the transaction, and Elena's lawyer immediately filed an injunction freezing the assets. The legal action revealed the full extent of the financial fraud, including Marcus's forged signatures and unauthorized use of Elena's business credentials. As summer turned to fall, Marcus and Sarah's world was imploding. Marcus faced potential criminal charges for fraud and forgery, while Sarah's business was bankrupt and her family was threatening to disown her for destroying their reputation. Their social circle had largely abandoned them as the truth about their betrayal became undeniable. But Elena wasn't finished. The final phase of her plan was approaching, the charity gala, where she would present the complete truth about their betrayal to everyone who mattered in their shared social and professional circles. Marcus and Sarah would be there, expecting to blend into the crowd and perhaps begin rebuilding their reputations. Instead, they would face the reckoning Elena had been methodically orchestrating for months. The woman they had tried to erase while she lay unconscious was about to remind them that some people are far more dangerous when they have nothing left to lose. As Elena prepared for the gala, she felt a cold satisfaction that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with the complete destruction of those who had betrayed her trust. The hurricane was about to make landfall, and nothing in its path would survive. The annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala was held at the Grand Ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel, the same venue where Elena had celebrated countless professional victories in her former life. She arrived fashionably late, wearing a midnight blue gown that had cost more than her monthly rent, but served a strategic purpose. Every eye in the room would be drawn to her entrance, including those of Marcus and Sarah. The effect was immediate. Conversations paused as Elena moved through the crowd, her confidence radiating despite the thin scars that traced her jawline like silver threads. She had deliberately chosen not to conceal them with makeup. They were proof of what she'd survived, badges of honor that made Marcus's claims about her breakdown even more obviously false. Elena, Patricia Blackwood, the hospital's development director, rushed over with genuine warmth. "You look absolutely stunning. I can't tell you how thrilled we are that our keynote speaker was able to make it, despite everything you've been through." Elena smiled, feeling the weight of the presentation remote in her clutch purse. Patricia had no idea that Elena's offer to speak about resilience in the face of betrayal would be far more literal than anyone expected. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, Patricia. This cause means everything to me." Across the room, Elena spotted Marcus and Sarah near the bar, their body language tense and defensive. Sarah wore a cream-colored dress that looked expensive but couldn't quite hide the stress weight she'd gained over the past months. Marcus's tuxedo hung loose on his frame. The pressure of facing potential criminal charges had clearly taken its toll. Dr. Webb appeared at Elena's elbow, looking handsome in his formal wear. Their relationship had evolved naturally during her months of recovery and planning, built on mutual respect and shared understanding of what it meant to fight through adversity. "Are you ready for this?" he asked quietly. "I've been ready since the day I woke up," Elena replied, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. "They chose the battlefield when they decided to destroy me while I was unconscious. I'm just finishing what they started." The dinner portion of the evening proceeded normally, with Elena playing the gracious survivor, accepting condolences and compliments with equal poise. She made sure to visit every table, renewing old friendships and professional relationships, building an audience for what was to come. Marcus and Sarah watched her movements like prey animals, sensing a predator, their discomfort growing more obvious as the evening progressed. When Patricia introduced Elena as the evening's keynote speaker, the applause was warm and genuine. Elena took the podium with the confidence of someone who had spent years commanding boardrooms and client presentations. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was about to deliver the most important presentation of her career to an audience that included the two people who had tried to end it. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Elena began, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's sound system. "When Patricia asked me to speak about resilience, I knew I had to tell you a story about betrayal, survival, and the power of truth." She clicked the presentation remote, and the first slide appeared on the screens around the room, a hospital photograph of Elena in her coma, surrounded by machines and bandages. A shocked murmur rippled through the audience. "This photo was taken 3 weeks after my accident," Elena continued, her voice steady. "While I was fighting for my life, unconscious and unable to defend myself. Some people I trusted made decisions that would change everything. I want to share that story with you tonight because it's about more than just personal betrayal. It's about what happens when we choose to profit from someone else's suffering. Marcus half rose from his chair, his face pale. Sarah grabbed his arm, pulling him back down, but their panic was visible to everyone nearby. Elena clicked to the next slide, the divorce papers with their filing date clearly visible. These divorce papers were served while I was in a medically induced coma. The grounds cited were irreconcilable differences and a claim that I was no longer the woman he married. Apparently, surviving a near-fatal accident had made me an unsuitable wife. The audience's shock was palpable. Elena could see people at Marcus and Sarah's table turning to stare at them with dawning understanding. But the betrayal went deeper than divorce. Elena continued, advancing through slides that showed the financial records, the forged signatures, the timeline of the affair. While I was unconscious, my husband emptied our joint accounts, sold our home, and used forged documents to steal my business relationships. He claimed I'd had a mental breakdown and couldn't handle my clients anymore. This, about a woman who was in a coma. Jennifer, their mutual friend, was staring at Sarah with an expression of absolute horror. 8 months, she whispered, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. You told me it was 8 months of secret romance. Elena smiled coldly as she clicked to the wedding photo Sarah had posted on Instagram. 2 weeks after I woke up from my coma, still learning to walk again, my husband married my best friend, the same woman who had been visiting our home regularly before my accident, ostensibly to help him cope with my demanding work schedule. The room erupted in shocked murmurs and gasps. Elena could see people pulling out their phones, some recording, others frantically texting. The truth was spreading in real time across social media, far beyond the confines of this ballroom. The most painful part, Elena continued, her voice carrying a note of steel, was discovering that my insurance settlement from the accident, money meant to pay for my medical bills and rehabilitation, had been invested in my replacement's failing business. They weren't just stealing my past, they were literally profiting from my pain. Marcus finally stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is harassment, he shouted, his voice cracking. She's mentally unstable, the accident damaged her brain. Elena's smile widened as she clicked to her final slide. Medical records, psychiatric evaluations, and cognitive assessments, all showing normal brain function and mental capacity. These are my complete medical records, reviewed by independent specialists, and submitted to the state licensing board when my ex-husband tried to have my professional credentials revoked based on fabricated evidence. She paused, savoring the moment, as Marcus's face went ashy. The same fabricated evidence that the district attorney's office is now using to build a case for fraud, forgery, and identity theft. Sarah stood up abruptly, knocking over her wine glass. We have to go, she said loudly, grabbing Marcus's arm. This is slander. Truth isn't slander, Elena replied calmly into the microphone, and running away now won't change what you've done. But they were already pushing through the crowd toward the exit, followed by the shocked stares and whispered condemnations of everyone they passed. Elena watched them go with satisfaction, knowing that their humiliation was being broadcast live on social media to thousands of people. The ballroom erupted in applause, but it wasn't the polite charity gala clapping Elena had expected. It was the sound of people recognizing justice, however harsh, when they saw it. Dr. Webb reached the podium first, pulling Elena into his arms as the crowd continued to cheer. It's over, he whispered in her ear. You did it, but Elena knew it wasn't quite over yet. Marcus and Sarah's public humiliation was complete, their reputations destroyed beyond repair, but the legal consequences were just beginning. The recorded confession she'd just delivered to hundreds of witnesses would ensure that the criminal charges Marcus faced would stick. As Elena accepted congratulations from the crowd, she felt a complex mix of satisfaction and emptiness. She had achieved everything she'd set out to do. Marcus and Sarah were ruined, their betrayal exposed, their futures destroyed. But victory tasted different than she'd expected, less sweet and more final than she'd imagined. The woman who had entered this ballroom was not the same one who would leave it. Elena Martinez had won her war, but the cost of victory was the last remnant of the trusting, optimistic person she'd once been. In destroying her enemies, she had completed her own transformation into someone harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. The hurricane had made landfall, and nothing would ever be the same. 6 months after the gala, Elena sat in the visitor's room of the Federal Detention Center, watching Marcus shuffle in, wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on his diminished frame. The fraud and identity theft charges had stuck, just as she'd known they would. His business had collapsed within weeks of the public exposure, his assets seized to pay restitution to the clients he'd defrauded using Elena's forged credentials. "You look well," Marcus said as he sat across from her, separated by bulletproof glass. His voice carried none of its former confidence, the arrogance that had once attracted her now replaced by the hollow defeat of a man who had lost everything. "Prison suits you," Elena replied coolly, studying the man she'd once loved enough to promise forever. "Orange was never your color, but it matches your integrity perfectly." Marcus flinched at her words but didn't look away. "Why are you here, Elena?" "To glow. To make sure you understand," she said, her voice measured and precise. "You didn't just divorce me, Marcus. You tried to erase me while I was fighting for my life. You stole my identity, my money, my clients, my friends, everything that made me who I was. You turned my best friend into an accomplice and convinced yourself it was justified because I was unconscious and couldn't stop you." She leaned forward slightly, her reflection merging with his in the glass. "I want you to spend every day of your sentence remembering that you did this to yourself. Every morning when you wake up in this cell, remember that you had a choice. You could have divorced me honestly, taken half of everything, and built a new life. Instead, you chose to be a predator." Marcus's composure finally cracked. "I loved Sarah. I'd been miserable for years, but I stayed because I was successful and you needed my connections." Elena interrupted. "Don't romanticize it now. Miguel's investigation found the dating apps on your phone, going back 3 years. Sarah wasn't your first affair. She was just the first one stupid enough to fall for your promises." The knowledge hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd thought Elena's revenge had been complete with his arrest and conviction, but she was still revealing new depths to how thoroughly she'd investigated his betrayals. "Sarah doesn't visit you anymore, does she?" Elena continued, savoring his reaction. "She moved back to San Francisco after her parents disowned her. Last I heard she was working as a server at a chain restaurant. Funny how quickly love dies when the money runs out." Elena stood, straightening her tailored blazer, a far cry from the hospital gowns and borrowed clothes she'd worn during the darkest period of her life. Phoenix Strategic Solutions had become one of the city's most successful consulting firms, built on the foundation of her professional reputation and fueled by the sympathy and admiration her story had generated. "This is the last time we'll see each other," she told Marcus. "I wanted you to know that I'm not the broken woman you left in that hospital bed. I'm something else entirely, something you helped create but could never control." As Elena walked away from the detention center, she felt the weight of completed justice, but also the hollowness that had become her constant companion. Webb was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against his car with the patient expression of someone who understood that healing wasn't always linear. "How do you feel?" he asked, as she approached. "Empty," Elena admitted, the first completely honest thing she'd said in months. "I thought seeing him behind bars would feel different, more satisfying, maybe." James pulled her into his arms, and for a moment, Elena allowed herself to be vulnerable in a way she hadn't since before the accident. "You got justice," he said quietly, "but justice isn't the same as healing." He was right, and Elena knew it. She had built Phoenix Strategic Solutions into a powerhouse, had become a sought-after speaker on resilience and business ethics, had found love again with a man who understood both her strength and her scar. By every objective measure, she had not just survived her betrayal, she had thrived, but the woman who had once believed in second chances and the fundamental goodness of people was gone, replaced by someone who trusted sparingly and loved cautiously. Elena had learned to smile at client meetings and charity events, to laugh at James's jokes and accept compliments on her success. But underneath it all was a cold calculation that hadn't existed before her coma. She had become someone who could destroy lives with the same methodical precision she once brought to marketing campaigns. The skills were transferable, she'd discovered, understanding human psychology, identifying weaknesses, executing long-term strategy. The only difference was the stakes and the casualties. 3 weeks later, Elena received a letter forwarded from her old address. It was from Sarah, written on cheap stationery, in the shaky handwriting of someone who'd lost everything. "Elena," it began, "I know I don't deserve forgiveness and I'm not asking for it. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what we did to you. Marcus convinced me that your marriage was already over, that you'd grown apart and were just going through the motion. I believed him because I wanted to, because I was lonely and scared about my family's business failing. I know that's not an excuse. We should have waited. We should have been honest. We should have let you wake up and recover before we destroyed your life. I lost everything, my family, my business, my reputation, the man I thought I loved, but you lost more than that while you were unconscious and helpless. You lost your ability to trust, to believe in people's goodness. I can see it in the interviews you give, in the way you smile but your eyes stay cold. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I'm just sorry that in saving ourselves, we turned you into someone who can't be saved. Elena read the letter 3 times before feeding it into her office shredder. Sarah was right about one thing. Elena had lost her ability to trust completely, to love without reservation, to believe that people were fundamentally good. But she'd gained something else, the knowledge that she could survive anything, overcome anyone, and rebuild from nothing. As she looked out her office window at the city skyline, Elena reflected on the strange mathematics of revenge. Marcus was in prison, Sarah was working minimum wage jobs and estranged from her family, and Elena was more successful than she'd ever been. The score was settled, the betrayers punished, justice served. But late at night when James was asleep beside her and the city was quiet, Elena sometimes wondered if the woman who had driven home from that successful client presentation 2 years ago would recognize the person she'd become. That woman had been softer, more trusting, quicker to forgive and slower to suspect betrayal. That woman was gone, as surely as if she'd died in the accident. In her place was someone harder, more calculating, infinitely more dangerous. Elena had survived her betrayal and won her war, but victory had come at the cost of her former self. She realized exactly what Marcus and Sarah had made her, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to protect. The hurricane had passed, leaving destruction in its wake, but hurricanes didn't simply disappear, they transformed, becoming part of the atmosphere, changing the weather patterns forever. Elena Martinez had been reborn in that hospital bed, forged in betrayal and tempered by revenge. She was stronger now, more successful, and completely victorious, but sometimes in the quiet moments, she mourned the woman who had trusted so completely that she'd never seen the storm coming. That woman had been a casualty of war, and Elena had learned to live with the loss. After all, some things, once broken, could never be made whole again. They could only be remade into something entirely different.